All right. We got on to what you do, and I know you just had a big case before the Supreme Court, and...
I think all cases before the Supreme Court are big.
Yes, they are. Once you get to the Supreme Court, you're playing the main room. And they turned you down, but tell us why it is that if someone does art, no matter what it is, and the government refuses to fund it, why is that a violation of the First Amendment?
Well, the case was actually about the decency language clause that when giving out funds or giving out support by the federal government, that there has to be a certain standard of decency. And we felt that it was vague to decide who is going to decide what is decent or indecent. And second of all, indecent behavior or indecent language or indecent expression is covered by the First Amendment.
But not funded by it.
Yes, but see, you can't get away by funding or support as an American, wherever you go, whether it's the library, anywhere.
This quest was submitted for the exhibition since it was one of the slides that had gotten me the award in the first place. And the American Family Association, when they found out about the award and the photograph, instigated this campaign where they sent out about 178,000 letters.
My hand got slapped really, really hard when certain fucked up right-wing senators and congresspeople in Washington took my NEA grant away and took away the right of any queer person in America to raise their creative voice with 1 cent of our tax money. My hand got slapped really, really, really hard when so many of my lovers and friends died of AIDS.
With communism dead, Jesse Helms has found a new enemy to crusade against for this election. The controversial photographs of a dead homosexual artist.
I can't begin to describe those photos. Mr. Mappelthorp, a self-portrait with a bullwhip protruding from his posterior.
I feel like this country was founded on biblical truths, and I feel like Helms is leading us more back that way.
Now that I have mourned the passing of men, loves never had, acts unacted, perversion polighted pubescently. Now that I have shed shades of nigger, boy, for pigments of faggot, queer, gender, blender, blur.
This election is about more than who gets what. It is about who we are. It is about what we believe, what we stand for as Americans. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, for this war is for the soul of America. And in that struggle for the soul of America, Clinton and Clinton are on the other side, and George Bush is on our side.
You don't hold me, bastard! You fucking asshole! You wanna suck my pussy!
I decided to move to Berlin because I wanted to live outside of the US and be part of more of an international community. And Berlin is a pretty artist-friendly city. While I've been here, I've been doing research on the culture wars during the 1990s and 80s in the United States. I wanted to learn more about the culture wars because I had become really involved in my aunt's dance company, Pat Graney Company, as well as the National Performance Network in New Orleans. I felt like this intergenerational mentor aspect to working within the arts was really important, and a big part of that was learning about the histories, and that included the culture wars.
So I want to ask you just some basic questions about the culture wars.
Okay.
I mean, the culture wars represents like main conflicts that have been existing for a long time, but specifically the culture wars with the NEA and with artists in the 1990s. When did you first start hearing about it?
Well, I didn't hear about it. I was living through it, so it's very different. We didn't call it the culture wars. We were in the state, it was like a state of siege. It's just a funny name because it's, you know, how anything becomes this movement or something, and you're not aware of it because you're just living through it. All of a sudden, it felt like you were being, there was a similar feeling in the 70s, which was like the police are starting to shut you down, and that's really like a big government kind of a feeling, and it's a very subtle, strong feeling of oppression.
I was reading some of the stuff that you sent me about ABC No Rio. I don't know, and I just thought it was interesting because the part where you were talking about noticing these early NEA cuts in the second Reagan era, that's kind of the first time I've heard about it.
Somewhere between 84 and 86, we had funding from the New York State Department of Cultural Affairs, and we had funding from the National Endowment on the Arts. So we kind of inherited ABC No Rio from the collective collab that founded it. However, about our second year of running ABC No Rio, our funding was retracted completely. If there's a problem seen with an organization, the funding is reduced as a warning. And normally there'll be a verbal warning or some kind of a communication because it's understood in the funding organizations that that becomes like a part of the organization's budget. We found out that we were indeed recommended for funding by our artistic peers, but then we found out that the chairman of the NEA had asked the panel to rescind the funding. The reason that was given for rescinding our funding was that the quality of the material had dropped. What we found out later through Emily Rubens, who ran a group at an organization called Charis, there's a very strong Latino constituency. They had also had their funds eradicated, no warning. And Emily had done research, and she discovered that what had happened was that all over the country there were small organizations similar to ours, organized or focused on people of color, or were politically or socially progressive driven, or both. So we contacted other organizations, primarily in New York, the so-called alternative spaces. And I tell them that in my view, they were picking on small organizations that didn't really have many resources to respond. None of these organizations responded. No message of affinity, no letter writing, no support. Only when these very spaces, the alternative, nonprofit white spaces, that had considerably higher recognition, like the picture, like Franklin Furnace, artists like Karen Finley, they all started to become galvanized because by that point the attack was in full force. You know, I bring this discussion up, but it's the kind of brick wall that we face in culture, and not even by the milieu of the alternative art movement to which everyone thought they belonged.
I mean, I see it in a lot of different ways. Obviously, if one wants to take a big sort of historical reflection on sort of, and let's call it sort of the emancipation movements of the 70s, social emancipation movement, the conservatives sort of pushback in the 90s was really about sort of resisting, you know, sort of feminism, queer, people of color, and artists.
Well, the Reaganomics thing really started to have an effect. Jesse Helms was a very strong character then from North Carolina, and he became kind of like the Jimmy Swaggart, kind of like religious, right, let's kill the queers kind of person. But they started latching onto artists. Because I think it was Andres Serrano who, at that time, do you know who Andres Serrano is?
Yeah.
Isn't that
it's Christ.
the crucifix and the urine? They were the born-again Christian sort of fundamentalist movement. Looked at that, and all of a sudden that was an entree into controlling, like, the heathen artists or, like, the pagan non-believers or something, bringing in, again, really bringing the presence of religion into government.
Back in the early 1990s, I was a consultant to a lot of different organizations in the United States, and one of them was the National Campaign for Freedom of Expression. So they were, at that time, the lead anti-censorship organization in order to respond to the NEA Four, which is the 4 artists whose NEA grants were denied on account of mostly what was perceived as homoerotic content. That was the word that was used, but generally just content that was shocking, explicit sexuality, mostly sexual stuff. And a number of people from different worlds organized around them and around the withholding of NEA funds from Andres Serrano and Robert Mappelthorp for images that they created. Mappelthorp, again, the gay content of it was the most shocking thing probably to the people who were interested in censoring it. Serrano did a little icon of Jesus immersed in a beaker of urine and stuff like that, and that was offensive to religious people.
So early 90s, we had actually at Jumpstart presented Karen Finley and Tim Miller already, right? And all of a sudden we heard these rumblings that something was happening at the NEA on the council level. As a grant goes through, you have a peer review panel, peer review that judges artistic quality, and then it goes to what they call the council, which is their advisory board, which can yay or nay, but they never nay, right? Because they trust the peer review process. Well, there was a woman on the council, her name is Jocelyn Strauss, who is from San Antonio. Well, for some reason, she got connected, we think, with one of them was Lynn Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife. So Jocelyn Strauss, Republican activist, had some people talking to her, and so she brought up at the council meeting that there were these 4 grants by individual artists who did not have artistic quality. She did not use content, right? It wasn't about content because that's dangerous. Holly Hughes, Tim Miller, Karen Finley, and John Flex. At council level, they pulled those grants, and she was the instigator. She and I battled in the San Antonio paper, she would write an editorial and I would write an editorial. And I would say, you cannot argue about quality. So many people want them, they've been judged by the peer review process. This is about politics. And she would say, no, this is about quality. And I said, this is about content. And this is about homophobia. It's about sexism. It's about a woman who takes control of her own body and talks about issues. It's about these queer artists who talk about being queer in society. And I said, this is social politics. And you know it, and you deny it, but you're lying. So I basically called her a liar.
So I was the director of NEA through most of the 90s and we were a co-plaintiff in the Finley versus NEA lawsuit. We joined into that lawsuit very specifically to challenge the standards of decency language. So that was about 9 years in the courts. The artists themselves settled the issue around the denial of their fellowships. The NEA admitted to the fact that, they had erred and they got the fellowships back. But that statute was on the books and is still on the books. So we went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the reason NEA was part of that lawsuit is that basically we were arguing that language had a chilling effect, and it was having a chilling effect on the organizations that presented these artists, which was my community of alternative spaces, artist-run spaces.
I mean, I think it really changed people in a big way. There's the NEA Four and there's all that stuff, but I mean, I think that at the time we were aware of it, but I think that it was more impacted like make sure that you're covering your ass because you're not going to get any more funding. There was just this sense that all of a sudden people were being censored, and they were being censored, and everything got censored. Grants got censored. They had people start signing for anti-drug policy in order to get grants. This whole government heavy on the top, moving down sort of feeling, and that was the start of it.
What our reality is in the United States is that we have these periodic inoculations. And each time we're inoculated, it strengthens a pre-existing tendency. So the McCarthy period and what you're calling the culture wars period are both inoculations, and the result that they produced was an epidemic of self-censorship. I always say that censorship is the element of public policy that's the most effectively decentralized in America, because basically every individual is carrying it out. We hardly have any overt censorship anymore. Nobody really pushes the line.
Locally, I think, for a long time, it threw us off. Like, we were discombobulated. The thing about self-censorship, right? So I think that's also a legacy that happens, I perceive, in some intergenerational work, where people are afraid because this history has been, we are afraid from our generation, right? We're afraid to do the really transgressive work because what will happen, right? We talk about, will this get us in trouble? Mm-hmm. Now, 99% of the time we don't care, but just the question is there is disconcerting, right? And I wonder, I'm not sure, but I wonder what that legacy is.
In looking at the U.S. culture wars, I do wonder about what my generation has inherited from this history. Obviously, the NEA cuts and decency policy are things that we have inherited, and that's why I wanted to do this research. I think a lot of people within my generation don't know about this history, but it was really interesting for me to explore these cultural debates from the perspective of a second-generation artist. What is it to vicariously live through losses like this, but not have been there myself, when I am so strongly influenced by my mentors and those who are leading cultural policy in the U.S. One thing I think a lot about also is what is happening now, what changes are happening in cultural policy, what are the new innovations that are coming from those who are influenced and involved in the culture wars, and also people within the second generation, younger artists and art practitioners.
You talk about intergenerational stuff. I've talked about people of color, organizations of artists of color, individual artists, radical artists, those kind of things. So for us, for instance, one of the things we did right after the NEA Four and the cultural wars is we made a point of programming radical artists on purpose, right? So we tried hard. We got Holly Hughes. We said we want all the NEA Four. We couldn't get John Flack because he wasn't touring anymore. I think what the vision for the future should be is we shouldn't say, oh, there's never going to be individual artist grants. Oh, there's never going to be, place for radical art in the NEA. No, I think we need to be proactive.
The failure of U.S. policy research has been sort of this embrace that it's an empirical science, and it's not. I mean, it can't be. So I would only sort of say that because public policy is sort of a social science that privileges empirical evidence. Come on, as artists, it's creativity. Culture is fluid, and policy wants to fix. So that, there's always that tension. And if you want to privilege the fixing, meaning by making it static, then you're going to fail. It's going to just fail big time. So you got to kind of make a system that is porous, nimble, contradictory, paradoxical, all that shit.
Suddenly you have this construction of culture wars, and at least people are talking about it, at least people are aware of it. So I don't really see anything that sheds light on a problem as being depressing. Sure, the problem itself is depressing, but what's more depressing is the fact that the problem pre-existed and nothing was being done about it and was allowed to come to a situation.
I think most people think that artists are just way out there. They're not, what they're doing is not work. I think they think a little bit different about writers than they do visual or performing, especially performing artists. That's kind of way out there, So unless you were in the circus or something. But I guess in general, the funding of the individual artist lent a credibility to the artist as a contributor, as a cultural contributor, as a generator of ideas, as someone who is in the food chain. And now people are still so afraid of that. They don't want to associate with that.
What I see is a huge shift, a paradigm shift really in our understanding of the meaning and purpose of art. The way that art and the work of artists and culture in general is seen in the United States, which is kind of like the icing on the cake, a shift from that to understanding that the way that people actually make meaning and learn who they are and acquire the empathy and imagination that we actually need to have a sustainable world is through their relationship to music, to images, to movement, and so forth. So, I go to cities across the country and everybody's moving with their iPods in their ears to the soundtrack.
The culture wars back in the 80s, the artist community really rallied around their peers and their friends. And they understood the chill effect was going to have on their own practice. But now we have these laws that basically are going to deny citizenship to, Mexican Americans, Mexicans and Indians that were born here. It's like the stupidity of this. That's a new culture war. It's a multicultural nation. Mm-hmm. That Puritan impulse has been an impulse among sort of a dominant group, but it's not the norm.
The rubric for the for what I'm interested in policy-wise is cultural democracy. We have political democracy, economic democracy, and so forth as goals, and cultural democracy should be a goal too. But in a cultural landscape that's as market-driven as ours, to me it's logical that the public sector should have the role of making up for the imbalances of the marketplace.
What the NEA is trying to do and what Congress has tried to do in passing the Helms Amendment is control information. And the thing that makes me laugh is in the last 20 years, images and words that artists or writers make have had absolutely no power, given that we're essentially competing against media, in order to create something that reverberates in either images and words. And the fact that if at this point in time, images and words that can be made by an individual have such power to create this storm of controversy, isn't that great? It means that the control of information has a crack in its wall.